Hi, Mike. Sorry I didn't get a chance to call you today.
Oh, no, that's fine. We can touch base after or tomorrow.
Okay, great.
No worries. I just wanted to fill you in on that one, and we can do that later.
Great. Thanks.
Pretty quiet group today.
Count on Ron to be the first person to speak up. Good afternoon, sir.
I expect that quietness to change drastically shortly.
How about now? Is that better? Okay. Okay, so we're calling to order at 1:31 now. I'd like to state that we're conducting our business today on the territories of the Watershed and the Shot First Nations. At least that's where our office is today. Our physical locations state that we're pretty much all across New Chonolth and Coast Sales territory. And we do have an agenda before us that has 3 main items: correspondence for information and a request for decision regarding tax mitigation, but also the presentation of the ACRD financial plan, which will take up the bulk of our time. Are there any other items to add to the agenda or alter? And with that in mind, if we would entertain a motion to adopt it. All right, thank you, Director Roberts, seconded by Director Paulson. Any comments? Does anyone have any time constraints? Director Shannon, Director Paulson?
Thank you. I will be like 4:15, 4:30-ish to go get the.
Okay.
Thank
Director
you.
Paulson?
Knowing how efficient you are, Mr. Chair, my commitment is at 5 p.m. for another meeting.
Okay. I have a similar HFN budget meeting that is likely to take me away at 3:30. So at that point, since I'm double booked for budget purposes, I'm hoping that Director McNabb can take over in the event that I need to. Dr. McNabb?
So my time constraint is I'm getting older.
Okay, well, hopefully we can get through this in a way that suits everyone's requirement. With that in mind, are there any other comments? Director McCarthy, please go ahead.
Yes, my constraint, apologize, would be about 2:30.
2:30?
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry about that.
Okay. So before we hit 2:30 for you, Director McCarthy, I'll hit pause or chat at you and see if there's anything you wanted to have a comment on in regards to
Okay.
the budget or other conversations.
Okay.
Okay. With that, all those in favor? All opposed? Motion carried. Okay, that brings us into correspondence for information. So we have a letter regarding Tofino General Hospital and Alberta and Clyde tax requisitions. So that's quite a big letter. It sends a report as well. So the only thing we need to do with it is receive it, although I think there's some specific items that need to be spoken to there. But there is a decision item after the presentation of the financial plan that may touch on it as well. Mr. Holmes, is that your understanding?
Mr. Chair, absolutely. It's at your pleasure if you would like to talk about it now or in concert with item 5A as they are related, as you said.
Okay.
I'll move receipt. Oh,
Thank
sorry.
you. Thank you, Director Cote. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Director McCarthy. And first up for conversation, Director Colt, please go ahead.
It was seconding.
Oh, she was seconding? Oh, okay. I thought you were waving for a chat. Okay. With that in mind, all those in favor? All opposed? Motion carried. Okay, that brings us to the presentation of the 2021 to 2025 financial plan. So I'm thinking, Terry, will you be giving a presentation of the document?
It's actually going to be a combination of a bunch of staff members.
Okay.
I will be starting us off here, and Janice is going to share our PowerPoint presentation. The PowerPoint presentation might not quite be on the website, but will be on the website here shortly as well for use after.
Okay.
So I'm Terry Fong, Chief Financial Officer of the Alberta and Clayoquot Regional District, and I'm going to present the draft 2021 to 2025 financial plan to the Committee of the Whole today. And Janice is going to be our Vanna White, so we'll be saying next slide, please. Oh, you jumped right to the end. Okay, so the financial plan, as required by the Local Government Act, is a 5-year plan, so current +4. As a regional district, we must have each service have the proposed expenditures, revenues, and the expenditures cannot exceed the revenues. We need to do a public consultation process, which I'll touch on later, before we adopt the bylaw by March 31st. Similar process from what we've done in previous years, except that we're guessing, all virtual this year, which adds a little bit of an extra wrinkle for us. Next slide. Just a reminder that the financial rules for a regional district is that each service is siloed, so we cannot transfer funds between the services because they have, most likely they have different taxpayers involved. And the allocation of staff time is across the services based on the amount of time that we anticipate spending on each of these services, and we cannot run a deficit. Next, please. So this year with the development of the financial plan, we used the operating costs of the existing services. We also have the draft 2021 to 2024 ACRD strategic plan that we have used to develop this. The asset management plans are also nearing completion. And so we've started using that information that's been in those plans to guide, especially the capital planning portion. And the goal is to adopt a plan that has the allocation of resources and staff time to achieve the outcomes of the board. So that is what we're proposing today. And next slide. So the idea today is that we're just going to introduce the plan. A few other staff members will present their sections of the plan, and it'll give the board an opportunity to ask some questions. We're not actually asking for any decisions today unless you would like to make some changes that you know of already, but basically just to give you a complete overview of the plan. And then next week, we would start diving into some of the decisions. So we would like to use the parking lot format. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit here, but where we talk about the services that you would like to dive deeper into at some point. So then next week, we know there's some items that we already want to bring back. So there's some resource discussions that we need to complete. There's a peer review of the SOMAS flood management study that will come back as a RFD for next week. And then the allocation of the COVID restart funding, we had a little bit that we were undecided on when we were presented to the board in January because of the illegal camping initiative that we were talking about. So those are items that we know for sure are coming back. And then there'll be others, I'm sure, as we discussed today. Next slide. On the 24th as well, in the afternoon, we'll have the board of directors meeting. That is our official public consultation. So we'll give, or I will give, a condensed presentation of the financial plan to be the official public consultation part. But the public is welcome to participate in all of our meetings via Zoom. So we have that opportunity for the public for input as well. On the 25th, we'll have an Alberni Valley and Banfield Services Committee. Some of the items that we know that we're going to need to talk about further are level of service for this year for the Spurt Lake Marine Patrol, defining the objectives for the potential aquatic facility in the Alberni Valley. And then there was some grant and aids that were deferred from the February 11th committee, the whole meeting. March 3rd, we have a West Coast committee meeting. So if there's any West Coast services that we want to talk about further, those will go to that meeting. And then on March 10th, we're going to talk about parks, both regional and community parks, as we had started a discussion just prior to the lockdown last year regarding governance and level of service of the parks. And so we need to pick that conversation back up again. So we'll do that at the committee of the whole on March 10th. Next slide, please. We'll do the first reading of the financial plan on March 10th at the board of directors meeting. That same day, we'll either give a reading or adopt the hospital district plan, depending if we're ready or not. And then on the 24th, we'll hopefully adopt the financial plan, or we will have to set a date for March 31st or prior to adopt the plan if there's still some changes. So today is just the start of the process. We have weeks of budget discussions to come. So this is not a one crack thing at this document for sure. Public consultation this year, as I mentioned, is a little bit challenging. So we have set up a new email address, budget@acrd.bc.ca, which will advertise in the newspapers as well as on our website, requesting some input. We will participate in meetings such as Banfield Community Affairs, if you'd like, or the Spurt Lake Community Association. And then, as I mentioned, all of our meetings on Zoom do have an opportunity for public participation. So we're advertising that as well. Okay, next slide. So the different department presentations today will be from Planning and Development, Administration and Finance, Protective Services, Community Services, and the Regional Hospital District. So after each section, we'll ask if you guys have any questions regarding that section, and then we'll again ask at the end. Because of the format of this, and I'm doing it on my iPad, I actually can't see anybody. So if you need to speak up because I just keep talking, please do so. Next slide, please. Okay, so the parking lot, I mentioned that before, but basically we want to kind of identify the services that you would like to talk about further. So if we're talking about the landfill and you're like, oh, I really want some more details about that, please identify it for staff as a parking lot, and we will ensure that we bring that back either to the committee of the whole, or in that case, an Alberni Valley committee for further discussion. This just gives us an idea of what services you're wanting to look at a little bit more. So please feel free to do that during the presentation, or we'll give you an opportunity at the end to identify services as well. Next slide. So before we jump into the department presentations, there's a few things that were kind of overarching through the whole plan. So we got the COVID restart funding from the provincial government in the fall of 2020 and have made some decisions about allocating it. There's a few more items that we need to decide on. And so we'll be bringing this back on the 24th to the committee of the whole. And we have to determine the illegal camping if we're going to put some money for that. And in this case, we've put $10,000 going through rural planning to address that initiative, but we will discuss that further at that meeting. Next slide, please. Resources. So after the development of the draft strategic plan, we had brought a implementation guideline to the board for consideration with targets. The plan, this financial plan has been developed with those targets in mind, and these resources were identified. The two resources that we need to discuss further with the board are the communications coordinator and the purchasing coordinator. Both of those positions we will bring back report to the February 24th committee of the whole meeting. Next slide, please. And one new thing for this year is there's a couple of services that I'm proposing we create a rate stabilization or an operating reserve fund for. So there was significant surplus in Alberni Valley Custom Transit because of the restart grant funding that came from BC Transit. And if we use that money and that surplus in 2021, the tax rate will drop, or tax requisition will drop significantly, but then there'll be an offsetting spike the following year. So in order to kind of smooth that out, we're recommending the use of a reserve fund, an operating reserve fund, that would then use that money over time. So in Alberni Valley Custom Transit's case, it would actually be used over 5 years. And based on the plan from BC Transit, we would actually be able to flatten out the requisitions for the next 5 years, or 4 years, I believe. The other services that I'm recommending that we consider using this are in Electoral Area Administration. There was significant cost savings in that service last year because the directors didn't attend UBCM and a few other variables that went on due to COVID. But in 2022 is going to be the next local election, and those costs spike every 4 years. So if we use that 45,000 this year, put it in a reserve fund for next year, we can keep the tax rate stable next year and still have the funding to run the municipal election. So, and the final one that I recommend that for is for West Coast Transit. There are some significant costs coming up, including the shelters and then the operating costs. Of course, the plan for 2020 did not occur due to COVID and BC Transit delaying it a year, but I just think for us to drop or reduce that tax requisition in 2021 to spike in 2022 is going to kind of send the wrong message when there's lots of upcoming costs for that service. So those are the three services that I propose that for. If the board agrees, then we'll need to do some bylaws to get those in place before the end of March. So that will be coming towards you again. So that is kind of it to get the initial conversation going. The next plan is I'm going to pass it to Mike to do the planning and development section, but I'm just wondering if there's any questions on that information to there.
Director McNabb, please go ahead.
So, I mean, I realize the intent of these offsets of the stabilization reserve portions of it, but in a budget that we're trying to put together as, in my case, like an austerity style budget, these funds actually are important to being able to flatline the request for taxpayer money. So I would like to see us modify these funds so that we can actually do that, because some things cost us more money to do because of COVID and some things cost us less. And the transit thing, the need for custom transit in the year of 2021 is going to be very similar to what we saw in 2020. We're going to be looking at a ramping up in the last 2 months of 2021, hopefully, with the return of services that within the community that folks that require custom transit can benefit from: the pool, the services at Echo Fur Park and Rainbow Gardens, bowling, other things like that that are typically used custom transit to access. So, I expect that we're going to be looking at a similar sort of offset from the province, like we have this year, or like the year of 2020. So we'd just be sort of pushing that into into a reserve account to offset the usage down the line. And today's taxpayers are going to pay for that. Tomorrow's taxpayers are going to benefit from it. So I'd really like to kind of rejig that a little so that we can get a better look on the actual request for taxes. I mean, the Electoral Area Administration aspect of it is another pretty good example. We'll be looking at pretty much the same scenario this year as last year, and then we're going to have a surplus that you know, is going to push forward again. So I'd like to adjust that considering the expectations of 2021 and on both of these accounts. And the other one that I've looked at is Sprout Lake Marine Patrol as well, you know, very similar situation. So that's it. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. I will parking lot those items.
Okay, I have Director Roberts and then Director Cote.
Yes, thanks for that. Also, I'd like to talk to you with regards to the West Coast Transit. So I'd like to have that parking lotted as well, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Yep.
And Director Cote.
Thank you through the chair. Just would like to have an update from transit as to what their costs are to date and what the ridership is. I think that would help us to identify what the lower cost of transit is coming to us. So I think that the costs are going to be quite the same. I think you need to have drivers, and the costs are the same, and we're not going to be getting the token pay for ride. I think that's going to be lower, but I think that we still have to pay for buses, even though they're not running.
Okay, and Jenny is going to be presenting about the custom transit later in this presentation. Right now, I was just touching on the rate stabilization reserve, but some of those questions might be answered by her when we get to that part. Otherwise, I have definitely made a note of it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And I think for everyone at the meeting, it's important that we note that what we're doing is we're earmarking things to talk about at a later date as well. I don't expect anyone to, unless there's a wide consensus, which would be aware of already, to really want to push home any changes to the plan at the moment. But we will be receiving further updates next week. So this is something that, if it's important that we do look at something in the near future, we just earmark it and keep moving, because there's quite a lot of content to get through. But when the presentations are occurring and you'd like to interrupt for clarity, just unmute yourself and say your name and then your question, because it is pretty hard for me to follow along with the small images myself. So yeah, that'll be something that might be necessary. Okay, are there any other comments? Okay, seeing none, please continue, Terry.
Okay, so now we're going to pass it to Mike Erg for planning and development topics.
Good afternoon, everybody. For any public watching, I'm Mike Erg. I'm the General Manager of Planning and Development. And everybody can hear me okay? So the first topic is regional planning. So do we have, and within each service, I'm going to talk about the projects and also the day-to-day applications, or the, you know, sort of the core part of what we do. So in regional planning this year, we have the SOMAS Watershed Management Plan, was completed in 2020. As part of this project, the flood maps were developed for areas of the Alberni Valley, both in the city of Port Alberni, the electoral areas, and for the Seashot and Hippetchith reservation areas that were impacted. The electoral area directors reviewed the implications of the 200-year floodplain maps and how they set out new flood construction levels, and identified new areas of risk that are potentially subject to flooding. And the AAA directors have recommended a peer review of this study, and the draft budget includes it up to $50,000 to do this peer review. And that number was selected just because it represents 10% of the overall cost of the project. And we will be bringing a report to the next board meeting on the 24th, specifically about that. And also within this service, the ACRD received Housing Needs Report grant funding for the 4 Treaty First Nations. And so that total was $15,000 for each of the 4 Treaty First Nations, for a total of $60,000. And this is going to be managed sort of in conjunction with the rural planning component, which is part of the Electoral Area Director Service in rural planning. So next slide, please, Janice. And so part of regional planning includes referral applications from the province, and to make sure that provincial topics such as subdivision and crown lease referrals comply with zoning bylaws and OCP requirements. So I would note that we had 33 applications in 2020 of these type of applications, and we expect 2021 to be similar. These include Ministry of Transportation subdivision referrals, Agricultural Land Commission referrals, Crown Land referrals, and then miscellaneous referrals that include things like mining applications, liquor licenses, water licenses, etc. Next slide, please, Janice. And so this just a topic on the SOMAS Watershed Flood Management Plan. This slide identifies where we're at in the process and what the next steps could be, as far as where we are. So when looking at the screen here, we're along to basically the 3rd step, and we're just in the process of distributing mapping and data for use in the community and also for mitigation purposes. And like I mentioned before, staff will be bringing a report back to the February 24th board meeting. Next slide, please, Janice. The agricultural plan and the ag initiatives. This continues to be a very busy project that we're working on, and I would say it's been a very successful program. It's something we're all proud of, and this project is led by the Ag Development Committee and then the Ag Support Workers Heather Shobe and Anna Lewis. So the support workers report to the planning team and meet approximately monthly with the Agriculture Development Committee, and are engaged in a number of initiatives. So this includes implementing the coastal addendum. So the West Coast is now part of the Ag Plan. And then one of the big projects is also the grant funding that we've applied to for the Vancouver Foundation, and we will be finding out if we were successful in that application in April, and that's for continuing work on systems change. Next slide, please, Jess. And I just wanted to touch a little bit more on the housing needs reports for the Treaty First Nation. So as I mentioned, that we've received $60,000 for the 4, and each of the areas are going to be dealt with a little bit differently. So Ukulithat and Tokwat will be part of a partnership that the regional district, the district of Tiafino, and the district of Ukilit are all doing to do one comprehensive housing needs report for the West Coast. And then basically there'll be an independent report or chapter on each area, which is a requirement of the grant funding and an appropriate way to do it. Uchucklasit will be an independent project, and then Hawaiiat will be an independent project as well, but also it'll be completed in collaboration with the work that is already well underway in Bamfield for the Bamfield Housing Needs Report. And I just wanted to note that there is also, of the $60,000, 15,000 of that is allocated to staff for ACRD staff time, and then the other will be used for consultants and staff with each of the Treaty First Nations. Next slide, please, Janice. So management of development. So this is the rural planning, the part 14 that covers off projects, as well as a lot of the planning applications that the board reviews. So this includes the electoral area housing needs reports, the zoning bylaw review, and OCP updates that are well underway in short-term vacation rentals. Next slide, please, Jen. So I just want to talk a little bit about development applications. So this includes zoning, OCP amendments, temporary use permits, development permit and development variance permits, and also the Board of Variance, which is something that the board is required to do. We received 57 development applications in 2020, and we expect similar activity. Certainly with early indications this year, we expect it may be even busier this year. And again, the management of these types of applications is the primary focus of the rural planning service. And we, as staff, coordinate with property owners on application details, engage with the advisory planning commissions, conducting public hearings, managing application processes, and also engaging with outside agencies. The total number of what we refer to as Part 14 or rural planning applications was 57, as I already mentioned. And I just wanted to touch a little bit on the process requirements for these types of applications. So in 2020, of the 57 applications that we received, legislatively, some are required to go through advisory planning commissions and public hearings. So 29 of those applications had to go to one of the 6 advisory planning commissions. There were 14 public hearings were required, 29 public notifications, and then to process all of these, 72, it has to be considered by the board and staff reports prepared. Sort of 72 separate resolutions would be required. So next slide, please, Janice. So with respect to the policy priorities for 2021, staff are proposing completing the zoning bylaw, continuing on with short-term vacation rental strategy and the policy, implementing the board's policy, and the West Coast it's actually not industrial, sorry, that was my typo, a West Coast land strategy that we're doing in conjunction with the districts of Tofino and Ucluelet. And then grant funded projects is the housing needs assessments for the 6 electoral areas. And those are well underway for 5 of them. And then that would be the Alberni Valley and Bamfield, and the RFP for the West Coast Housing Needs Report is just being prepared. And again, Long Beach is part of that in conjunction with the 2 First Nations and the 2 municipalities. Next slide, please. Touch a little bit on bylaw enforcement. So this is, in this service, we're responding to zoning and other regulatory bylaw infractions. This is done on a complaint basis, with the exception of the short-term vacation rentals, which the board has directed staff to identify and actively enforce and also work towards compliance with those short-term vacation rentals that are operating. One of the main projects we want to get fully implemented and operating this year is the bylaw notice enforcement. So this is our ticketing strategy, and the next steps on that is we've already adopted the bylaw to do this. The province has passed the regulation so that we're part of this service, and the city of Nanaimo has included us in their adjudication system, which is something that's required, and we're just finalizing the internal and administrative procedures that are required to implement in this process and issue tickets. And then the other project is completing or working through the open burning and woodstone bylaws, and the next steps are to complete the board requested public engagement and develop a public information campaign and design an implementation plan to enforce this bylaw when the board considers it and if it's adopted by the board. Next slide, please, Janice. So finally, I just wanted to talk, present about building inspection. So building inspection was particularly active in 2020. There were 121 building permits issued compared to 109 in 2019. And again, 2019 was also what we considered a busy year. The requisition the tax requisition in 2020 is similar to what it was in, in 2021. So the tax requisition in 2021, what's proposed is similar to what it was in 2020. And I would note that in 2020, there was a $30,000 reduction in the tax requisition from the 2019 tax requisition. And this is just reflective of the increased activity and the increased permits. Activity, as I've stated, remains high, and staff are in the process of bringing forward some amendments to the building bylaw, and this includes some changes to our fee structure, and we expect that to be presented to the board in March. And that concludes my presentation, so I would ask if there are any questions or parking lot issues that any of the directors wanted to bring up.
It's Tanya. Can I jump in?
Please go ahead.
Thank you. I'd like to put in the parking lot, talking about some agriculture development. And I guess specifically talking about possible compensation or ideas for the volunteers that are getting together almost monthly for ag development, that are volunteering their time away from their farms.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Director Bodner?
Thank you. This is just a question. If the ticketing system comes into effect, is there anticipate that it would take more time, and then how would that affect the budget?
So that portion is already factored into the budget for this year, so that's already anticipated that that's going to be happening. In 2020, we were short-staffed for quite a period of time, and we're just in the process of getting that rectified as well. So that's included in the budget for implementing the ticketing for the zoning bylaw.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Any further comments for Mr. Erk? Okay. Seeing none, thanks, Mike.
Okay, I would pass it over to Wendy.
Thank you. So good afternoon. My name is Wendy Thompson. I'm the General Manager of Administrative Services for the Alberni-Clayoquot Regional District. Today, I'm going to provide a brief overview on general government services and electoral area administration services. So general government services include such services as asset management, administrative services, human resources, information technology, bylaws and policies, and grant programs. I'm just going to touch on a few highlights from 2020. In 2020, we implemented new live streaming equipment in our boardroom, enabling us to record and live stream any meetings out of the boardroom to our website via YouTube. Due to the pandemic, we only ended up using this new equipment a few times in 2020, but will be hopefully used in the future. Also, was a very challenging year for IT staff in particular and management staff to find different ways to hold board and committee meetings and allow the public opportunity to provide input into our meetings. IT was really busy implementing Zoom webinar for us to be able to hold our meetings via YouTube on our website. And as well as IT was very busy with developing remote workstations for various staff. The Woodstove Exchange program continued in 2020, and this is through funding from the BC Lung Association. 2020 was a bit slower year. We only saw 7 exchanges conducted, but 2021 is looking very promising. We've had a lot of phone calls and several applications submitted so far. Highlights for 2021. We planned a regional district to retain a contractor who specializes in records management to conduct an assessment of the regional district's records management system. Part of this will include identifying gaps and risks with our current filing system, records management system, and offer options for improvements. Funds for this project will come from a grant through Municipal Insurance Association and also our Reports and Studies Fund. Improvement to the Regional District Records Management System is a huge project that will take several years to complete. As well, for 2021, we have IT upgrades. Projects identified include completing the Questica budgeting software implementation, upgrades to various operating systems. We require a new phone system for the Regional District Administration building. The current system is obsolete and no longer supported. And we also need to look at upgrades to our alarm system for the administration building. Staff will continue to review ACRD's bylaws and policies, and will be coming to the board with various new and updated bylaws this year. As well, we've applied for funding through the COVID-19 Resilience and Infrastructure Program to undertake a upgrade renovation to the front entrance of the administration building to improve safety and accessibility. And next slide, Janice. So Electoral Administration, Terry briefly touched on this earlier. This service deals with newsletters that electoral area directors can send out to their constituents. It also covers electoral areas attending UBCM and ABICC convention. This includes registration and travel and expenses to attend. This year, ABICC will be held virtually, so that cost will be reduced. And we haven't heard yet how UBCM will hold their convention this year. It could very well be virtually as well. And as well, Terry touched on this, we have elections. The general local government election will be held next October. So we'll have to budget for that as well. And that comes out of this service. So if anyone has any questions, I'm pleased to answer them.
Thank you. Are there any comments for Wendy? All right, seeing none, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. Great. So I'm going to turn it over to Terry.
Great.
John?
Sorry, I missed Director McNabb.
Sorry.
Oh.
Just to ensure that the stabilization contribution 290 is going to be discussed at some point. So whatever the parking lot is.
Yes. Yeah. We've noted that in the parking lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, please go ahead.
Yeah, so another aspect of that electoral area administration is that's where the community works funding flows through. So the electoral area committee has already met on the proposed initiatives for 2021 and have identified these four that I have up on the slide. So Sprout Lake Community Association for a multi-purpose court upgrade for $75,000. Phase 3 of the Sprout Lake Community Hall Association upgrade for $70,000. The Sprout Lake Community Park trail development for $140,000. We've also put this project in for a different grant application. So the Community Works Fund would be reallocated if we were able to be successful on that grant. And again, with the Beaver Creek Community Park upgrade, we submitted this for a grant application as well. So if successful, we will redirect these funds. And then there was also the rollover of all the projects that were not quite completed yet in 2020. So a fairly significant work plan for the Community Works Funds in 2021, which is great. Next slide, please. In terms of the finance department, I just wanted to touch on a few things. So asset management, with the asset management coordinator, we completed 11 of the 14 asset management plans. The 3 remaining plans are the Bamfield Volunteer Fire Department. That draft is actually completed and we're just finalizing some details with the fire department before we bring it to the board for adoption. The Bamfield Water System Plan, we're getting some engineering done because we didn't have a lot of detailed information to build the plan. So that should be done here, I believe, by the end of March, and then we can build the plan after that. And then with the parks function, we have chosen to create a combined approach with the regional and the community parks all going to be as one plan. So the asset management coordinator and the lands and resources coordinator have already started building this information, but we need to have that level of service discussion and governance discussion with the board, which we're going to do at the March 10th committee of the whole meeting before we can kind of finish that plan. From those asset management plans, we developed draft 10-year capital plans to use as part of our discussion or consider while we were creating the 5-year capital plans for these services. It identified that there is a lot of work to be done on these asset management plans and figuring out how we're going to fund those infrastructure deficits and gaps. So we're hoping to create more of that information for the board this year, or the different committees, and be starting to bring that information forward as kind of the next step in our asset management process. Another item for asset management is we got some funding through FCM to do an infrastructure assessment of many of our facilities, like condition assessments of our buildings. So we're hoping to do that this late spring. And I've mentioned this before, it's the asset retirement obligation, which is a requirement of PSAB auditing or accounting standards. So they, due to COVID, actually gave us an extra year. So this is still a fairly major project that the finance department is going to have to undertake, but we do have an extra year grace, which is wonderful. And Wendy mentioned we've started budgeting, the budgeting software. We actually have all of the operating budgets going in Questica now, which has been great, but a really large learning curve, not only just for me, but also for all the department managers. So we'll continue implementing that, not only from a budgeting standpoint, but a reporting standpoint. So those are some of the items that we have going on there. Next slide, please. And grant needs. So we discussed the grant needs at the February 11th meeting. There were some that were decided but requested delegations. So we have invited the groups to upcoming meetings. But then there was also 4 applications that were deferred. So we'll get the additional information that the directors requested and bring them back once we get that information for you guys to consider. And yeah, we're going to pass on to Heather now, unless there's any questions.
Are there any comments or questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Terry. Hi, Heather.
Hi, everyone. So for anybody watching, my name is Heather Zenner. I'm the Protective Services Manager for the Alberni-Clayoquot Regional District. The first service I'm going to talk about today is the Alberni Valley Emergency Program. And as a reminder, this is a shared service between the regional district and the city of Port Alberni. So the program is meant for all of the residents of the city, as well as the 4 rural electoral areas. So I've outlined the priorities for 2021, including hiring a protective services coordinator position. So the posting closed last week. We are in the recruiting process. So we hope to have that employee in place, and I will share that information when I can. Our emergency support service program implementation is going well. We are in the process of training our ESS volunteers. So we have about 15 volunteers. We've had excellent response to our request for support from the community. So our contract with Red Cross does end at the end of March. And as of April 1st, our ESS volunteers will be responding to people in need if they've been displaced from their house due to a fire or flood. We are implementing Voyant Alert. That's our emergency notification system. So that is going very well. We have 1,200 registrants already from January 18th until now, which is very excellent uptake. We have a grant with a marketing coordinator, a marketing contractor to market the program on our behalf. So that has been working well. We've also taken advantage of some earthquakes and tsunami potentials last week, which one day we had 200 people sign up for Voyant Alert. So it's exciting, and we will do our first test first Wednesday of the month in March. Training opportunities for emergency operations staff and directors and our community partners. It's been quite a few years since some of our staff and partners have had training. So I'm looking at developing practical training opportunities where people have opportunities to do exercises and actually use their skills. We have grant funding to do a wildfire related practical exercise. So we'll be planning one for the spring of this year. We are continuing engagement with our volunteer organizations. Over the past year, we've developed a strong relationship with the Salvation Army, and last board meeting, we entered into a memorandum of understanding with them. We also hope to expand that to other organizations in the community. Public education will be a big theme this year. We weren't able to do public events last year because of COVID, sort of anticipating the same for this year. I did a presentation to the Rotary Club a couple weeks ago. So I have a prepared presentation now that can be delivered to other employers or groups that want to receive information about emergency preparedness. As well, our emergency planning brochures for the Alberni Valley are quite outdated, so I'd like to look at refreshing those this year for the public. As well, we've applied for a large evacuation route planning grant through UBCM. We partnered with the city, Tashot and Hupachesit, and we are very hopeful that we're going to get that grant, and we should hear shortly. Another grant that we do have is for Fire Smart initiatives in the Alberni Valley in Banfield. We received this grant in 2019 with implementation in 2020. However, we didn't spend all of the grant, so we have a 1-year extension on the grant, which will allow us to do more curbside pickup for debris, potentially some free drop-off days, public education. And that's it for the Alberni Valley Emergency Program. Next slide, please. Thank you, Janice. So the next program I wanted to talk about was the Banfield Emergency Program. So the program in Banfield is overseen by a volunteer coordinator who receives a monthly honorarium for his services. He's been in place for about a year. He'll need continued support from myself to maintain the emergency program in the community. There's been very good community support for the emergency program in Banfield. The community is, for the most part, very self-sufficient and very used to being without power for long periods of time. So they are quite resilient. Now, in the Long Beach electoral area, before Christmas, the board adopted the Long Beach Emergency Plan, which was long overdue. So we need to explore what type of emergency program we want to implement in this electoral area. The EA has about 3 distinct geographic areas, Salmon Beach being one, Muscle Beach being near Salmon Beach, and then there's kind of 2 other rural areas that are distinct from Salmon Beach. So an emergency program in that area could be a similar model to Banfield with emergency program coordinators on a volunteer basis, or we could look at partnering with our municipalities or First Nations in those areas. Next slide, please. Okay, and then the West Coast Emergency Coordination Service. So this is a proposed service. The regional district's been speaking about this proposed service since about 2016. Due to the close proximity of the West Coast communities and length of distance from outside assistance, it would be beneficial to have coordination between the First Nations and municipalities and the electoral area and Parks Canada. Some initial workshops were held back in 2016 and 2017, and there was interest in looking at ways to coordinate training and emergency response in the event of a major emergency. So some areas of priority that were identified at the time were exercising together, evaluating existing emergency plans, hiring a coordinator, developing communication systems, defining emergency messaging, and then increasing community and individual preparedness. So this service has been outlined in the strategic plan, and staff will provide a report to the board in the fall with options for this service. And before I turn it over to Charlie to talk about fire departments, would anybody have any questions for me?
Are there any comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll move through. Thank you.
Thank you. And Charlie will talk about our fire departments.
Good afternoon. I'm the regional fire, and I'll brief you on the fire departments. And I'll go through them in order of the slide here. Bantam is somewhat dated and is requiring replacement to meet the fire underrated surveys. They are looking at a 5-year extension exception from fire underwriter survey to replace one unit. Replacement of a new truck is in the $500,000 range, so quite costly. Opportunities to purchase a good used unit are being investigated, and the insurance costs in Bantam are directly related to FSU ratings, and that's why it's so important that we try to meet the standards as best as possible. Sprout Lake is also looking at replacing some aging apparatus to meet the FSU guidelines. And one of the big things for the departments is each hall for the departments is required to have a frontline apparatus. So where Sprout Lake has 3 halls, each hall will require a frontline unit. So we're looking at through Dave Mitchell and Associates operational review of looking at the number of halls we have out there and whether we actually require 3 or with 2 would work better. Beaver Creek's big thing for this coming year is implementing a medical dental plan as a part of recruitment and retention for their memberships, trying to keep members involved and staying with the department. The new truck is in operation this past summer. Very near future, Beaver Creek will be looking at replacing their SCBA, which would be in the 150,000 range to replace that. And recently Beaver Creek received a 20,000 grant from the Office of the Fire Commissioner and Fire Chiefs Association BC towards replacement of their road rescue hydraulic equipment. And that hasn't been announced quite yet, but it has happened. We've been told verbally, waiting for the paperwork to come on that. And aside from that, the South Long Beach Fire Protection is a contract service with UQLIT, which we're going to review and update a very dated contract from there. And with that, I'll ask if there's any questions.
Are there any comments or questions? Okay, go ahead. Sorry, I had Director Cote, I think.
Thank you. Question through the chair. Will we know anything this year about Sprout Lake Fire Halls? Is the study going on right now?
The study is just starting right now. We're gathering information. A lot of it's been passed along to the Dave Mitchell and Associates. And as soon as time permits for them, they'll be attending locally to do an actual hands-on review here. So yeah, it's happening now. It's in progress.
Okay, thank you for that, Charlie.
And if there's no further questions, I'll pass it along to Jenny Brunn, the General Manager of Community Services.
Hello and welcome.
Thank you, Charlie. And for those watching, I'm Jenny Brunn, General Manager of Community Services, and we will start with regional parks. So we had some highlights in 2020. We did some infrastructure replacements on the log train trail and replaced the bridge at Platzer Creek, which we received some grant funding for. With the multi-use path on the West Coast, we were approved for stage 1 funding through the ICE-T program. We've also applied for SAREP funding, and we've allocated the Community Works Fund and some reserve funds and begun the design process for that, because one of the conditions of SAREP is for us to have a shovel in the ground at the end of the year. So hopefully we will receive that money. We should know by the end of February, we hope, if they don't extend that again, to let us know, but we're working towards hopefully having that moving. We've also established a partnership with Mosaic Forest Management in the province, looking at opportunities to basically provide more access to private forest lands, such as Mount Arrowsmith Regional Park. What we're hoping to do in 2021 is, as Terry had mentioned, look at the service levels, basically in conjunction with our asset management plans for the parks, reviewing the parks and looking at improvement plans. We are also continuing to look at upgrading infrastructure on the log train trail and the inlet trail, and working for more opportunities for other backcountry access in a safe manner. Next slide, please. The other community parks in Banfield, we've increased our staff allocation there to help support a lot of initiatives that are happening in the Banfield area in regards to parks. So we're hoping that we can provide some assistance to get some good planning in place and support those for long term. In Sprout Lake, we're going to be assisting with the upgrade of the Lakeshore Trail and doing an extension to that. And that will receive some community works funding. I think we've also applied for a potential grant, which may or may not be successful, and repaving Cougar Smith Park. Evergreen Park Bridge replacement is also, we're looking at for a grant application, and if not, community works funding. In Cherry Creek, looking at a plan for the Maplehurst trails. We found in both Sprout Lake and Cherry Creek, we had a lot of increased public use this summer due to COVID, which is excellent, but it requires a bit of planning and improvement for those parks. Next slide, please. Sprout Lake Marine Patrol, we will be providing a report to the AVB committee next week to talk further about this. This program was postponed during 2020 because of COVID, and we know we're facing a similar but different year, so we're going to look at how we may or may not provide the service this summer. So we'll provide more information to the committee. Next slide, please. And the Alberni Valley Regional Airport. So in 2020, we installed the automatic weather observation system and completed the GPS approach, which were flight tested, which is excellent. In 2021, we're looking to put in a small equipment shelter, purchase a used plow truck, continue with OLS clearing for the instrument approach procedures, finish some crack sealing, improve some gating, fence, and access issues for the site. We also want to develop an airport fee bylaw, which we don't currently have for that airport. And the ABRA Advisory Committee is completing a visioning exercise, which will provide sort of strategic direction for a work plan moving forward. Next slide, please. Thank you. In 2020, at the Long Beach Airport, we really saw quite a bit of impacts from COVID here. So significantly reduced passengers, which also resulted in reduced revenues and increased costs for terminal cleaning. We applied the COVID restart funding for that. And also we were with the OLS clearing that we did, we ended up harvesting a tremendous amount of timber that we weren't expecting to receive significant revenues for, which we did, which is nice. That money's been set aside and put towards the capital reserves, because we struggle with funding the very large capital improvement program that we have, which we offset with grant funding, but we're coming to a bit of a challenge there. We're also seeing a significant increase in interest for long-term leases, which is great for the airport. In 2021, we'll be doing the upgrade program for the fire suppression and water system, which is funded. We'll receive grant funding for that. Continuing with more OLS clearing and vegetation management, looking to put an application into ACAP for the loader snowblower. We also want to complete an airport servicing plan, which will essentially lay out water and sewer needs for the properties for the near and long term. Developing wildlife protection plan, which could allow us to look at alternatives to fencing the airport. We may have to do that or provide other management systems to protect the wildlife. We have some airside signage and crack sealing to complete, and we're going to do a little bit of administration stuff around long-term leases, hopefully establishing processes for that, looking at airport fees and rates and other revenue opportunities, and also continuing discussions with the Tloquet First Nations on airport land use. Next slide, thank you. And one of our big projects in community services, of course, is the organics diversion, which we received $6 million in grant funding for. We started that project last year. When we had an organics coordinator come on board, we really started ramping up. Since over the year, we have a local processing facility for organics secured for the Alberni Valley. We've had carts ordered and under basically getting created as we speak. We are looking to do the capital upgrades for the Alberni Valley landfill, which will just allow us to better transfer the organics on site there, hopefully to start that construction project in March. And this will all support rolling out the 3-stream curbside collection within the city of Port Alberni in late spring, early summer. So that's very exciting. Also looking forward to phase 2, which is the West Coast Organics diversion. And part of that will be doing the design for the facility at the landfill, as well as, again, upgrades around the public tipping area and transfer station area. We have issued an RFP, so we'll be starting design for that as soon as possible, with construction to be completed in spring 2022. And looking forward to phase 3, we also need to start doing engagement with the electoral area surrounding surrounding the city of Port Alberni, and looking at what does organics diversion look like for those areas. So we're hoping in fall to start doing some basically public outreach and engagement to look at what the service will look like. And phase 3 also includes Banfield, but we're looking at that for 2023. And a nice plug in here, if you haven't downloaded the Sort and Go app yet, that is our new brand that we've developed for the organics diversion. So as you can see, we've got some carts up there, really fancy, nice logo, Sort and Go Organics for your organics cart. And you'll have Sort and Go recycling for recycling and trash for the waste that's left. Also, we're incorporating the Bear Safe and Wild Safe BC program as much as possible. So you'll see bears on the organics carts, reminding people to always lock them and make sure that they're safe. And we've set up the Let's Connect ACRD website, which basically will help to do more public engagement for all phases of the organics diversion. So if you download the Sort and Go app, if you haven't already, it'll help you know when your collection day is, what will be collected, and then where to take exactly what weird product you have that you want to get rid of. So next slide. And the Alberni Valley Waste Management. So we had a wonderful year actually at both landfills in a certain regard. With COVID, there was a lot of additional activity. People were home, they're renovating, buying a lot of stuff on Amazon. So what we expected was to see, we weren't sure at the beginning of the year, but definitely economic activity and purchases and things were going up. And luckily for us, we saw that go more into recycling than into waste. So our waste generation went down a little bit from 589 to 568, and our diversion rate went up from 20% to 23%. So that's good news. And we will have more detailed information about both of the landfills coming out in the annual reports shortly. We did close the 3rd Avenue Depot for about 6 months. And as a consequence, we expanded the stewardship products at the landfill. And we saw a lot of increased recycling in that regard. And also they've reduced the cover usage, which is will help us extend our landfill because we reduce the airspace. So lots of good news. In 2021, we're hoping to finalize the design, operation, and closure plan that we began in 2020, and that's going to help us with our long-term capital plans. The partnership that we had set up with Vancouver Island University to do some interesting landfill gas monitoring, we had to defer that from 2020, so that should be starting in 2021. We're also going to be doing the installation of a flare at just a specific gas, methane gas point that we found in the landfill, and some small localized weather monitoring equipment. We're also going to be upgrading the McCoy Lake Pump Station, which provides potable water and fire protection to the reservoir at the landfill. And we're going to be bringing the backup interception wells online for leachate. Next slide, please. The West Coast. So we finished the economic analysis, and that basically looked at whether we should consider closing the landfill and transferring waste away, or investing in upgrading the leachate treatment system that we have. And the latter was decided on. We also got a new curbside collection contractor, reviewed our rates. We added some more diversion for mattresses, rope and netting got expanded, and we ran a composting pilot. Along with the education campaign, which built on previous year and really focused on the commercial and tourism sector. We saw a lot of success with that. And again, same message, our waste generation was down and our diversion is up. And diversion was up significantly from 13% to 19%. So all very good news. In 2021, we're looking to update and renew the operation contract. and work on the conceptual design of the leachate upgrades, which actually should be coming to the next West Coast Committee meeting, which will give us a plan for next steps on where we go with the leachate. As mentioned, we're going to be working on the design for upgrades at the landfill and preparing for the 3-stream curbside collection in 2022. Next slide, thank you. Beaver Creek water system was actually, it was a really active year in 2020. We put in a new generator, as you can see in the picture, at the North Reservoir, replaced a vehicle. We did water line replacements on both Fayette and Lamarck. We did the design for Karen Road, and we did a minor sort of a services transfer in the Compton Beaver Creek area, where we had a very high priority water main replacement, and we partnered with the city to address that in a very cost-effective way, and that was an excellent project. We completed an assessment of the Stamp pump station, and we saw a reduction in the number of breaks in the system, which is hopefully a result of all of the water main renewal that we've done in the past few years. So that's good news. 2021 is going to be a much quieter year. We are probably just doing a unidirectional flushing program and applying for funding for water main renewal to build up the capital reserve. Next slide, thank you. Banfield. So in Banfield in late 2019, we had some damage to the submarine water main that feeds West Banfield. And as a result, from then and all of last year, we were struggling with a lot of breaks on that line. And so we did an assessment. We had some engineers come in and do an assessment and did a lot of repairs, finally went in and have been working on basically doing joint renewal and protection measures for that line, as well as the one on Grappler Inlet. And so we're working to try and address that. We've put together some grant applications which have been made, and we're going to continue to try and see what we can do to protect those very vulnerable and important transmission lines. We also see a continued reduction in revenues, which is good news in a conservation manner, because it's reduced water usage. So it also makes it challenging when we have the emergency breaks and the associated costs with that. So in 2021, we're looking to complete the infrastructure renewal plan and the asset management plan. Those are going to be really important for long-term planning for Banfield and looking at what we need to be planning for and budgeting for capital. And we're going to be keeping our eyes open for grant opportunities to fund some of this infrastructure renewal that we are going to see. Next slide, thank you. Millstream. So in 2020, we completed the asset management plan, and it really showed that we have a pretty big gap for our capital reserve and infrastructure renewal. So we did do a rate increase, and that's helping to address those issues. In 2021, we're going to be upgrading the treatment system that's there. It's currently just chlorine. We're adding ultraviolet, and then bringing in variable speed pumps and some improved control and communication. And that's funded through the Community Works funding. So we hope to have that done by mid-year. We're also going to look at doing a system audit to identify any commercial use in the system, and then we can address that through metered rates per the bylaw. And we're looking to update the Millstream Water Emergency Response Plan. In Salmon Beach, we have just extended the hauling contract for a year to give us a little more time to look at recycling and organics options, which the community is interested in for the transfer station. In the security fund, we're looking to, we saw some increased maintenance costs, so they're going to be looking at replacing the gate to address those issues. In the sewage service, we are going to be looking at treatment upgrades. We need to renew the license of occupation, and long-term, we will have to look at reviewing the rates as we have a lot of capital expenses in that service specifically. The committee was very supportive of doing a 5-year road improvement program that we're going to start implementing this year, as well as dealing with culverts and the installation of those on request. And in 2020, we completed an options for basically community water report, and we do not have any follow-up on that service for this year planned. Custom transit. Okay, so in 2020, there was a service expansion planned, but then when we had COVID, we saw a reduction in in usage and revenues. The fares were waived for 6 months. I'm not 100% sure what our actual service hours used were, but we were supposed to, we had allocated just over or just under 7,000 service hours. Our operating costs were less, so we know that those weren't all used, but I will do some investigation to see exactly how much of the hours were used. BC Transit has basically given restart grant funding to every single transit system. So the custom transit system received some of that, which definitely helped to offset any losses in revenues. But because it's custom transit, when we don't run, not only do we lose revenues, but we also don't have to spend the cost to operate it. So as Terry mentioned, that service is going to have a surplus running. The funding, I think, was about just under $50,000 from the Safe Restart funding was allocated until, so that's provided to get us through until 2024. So we've basically spread that grant out to help with the service, and it'll be interesting to see what the usage will be this year, if we're going to be allocating or using all of the hours that we've allocated to the service. Yes, and I think that's everything on that one. Next slide, please. West Coast Transit. So as Terry had mentioned, we are, the service commencement has been deferred and we're looking to start for spring or summer of 2022. And what we're doing right now is basically confirming the service provider, which will determine basically the bus size that we can run on the system. And then once we know what the bus size is, then we can do some better route planning, as well as infrastructure requirements for shelters, benches, and just confirming exactly which partners are in and what the routing looks like. So I think that's everything on that one. And I will hand, oh, actually, is there any questions would be a better
Great,
point.
thank you. I have Director Shannon and then Director Paulson.
Thank you. Jenny, I just have a question. If you fly all the way back through your slides to trails, if it's a parking lot item or not, to talk about where we are in discussions with Mosaic for access. Like if that's going to come up at our trails meeting in March, then cool. If not, I'd like to put it in the parking lot. Thanks.
We can definitely provide some more information back on that. It doesn't necessarily have a financial impact, but I think it would be good to provide just an update on where we are with that. Because I know right now the discussion that they were looking at with Mount Arrowsmith, they might actually be looking at a different location as a trial for opening up for public access. So we'll see if we can get some more information back to you.
That would be great. Thank you.
Great. Next up, I have Director Paulson and then Director McNabb.
Thanks for the report, Jenny. Just a couple of very quick things while they're on my mind, and they may not have that much to do with budgeting, but with the Long Beach Airport or the West Coast Airport, you mentioned looking at longer term leases, and just maybe in parallel, that was identified in a SWOT exercise that was identified as a weakness at the AVRA airport as well. So I don't know if we create airport improvement areas for leases, but it was identified as a weakness for our airport as well. And just to very briefly, while I have it on my mind with regards to the three-tier waste management program, I was contacted by an employee from RDN in Parksville, and they rolled out their program, I think, last summer. And the employee that contacted me was Jill Grisdale, and she said she would be more than happy to talk to our staff with regards to some of the glitches, and she wasn't specific on some of the problems they had when they rolled that program out, but their staff is more than happy to have a chat with us and give us an overview of their rollout. And the pluses and minuses that happened during that role. I just wanted to mention that while it was fresh in my mind.
Thank you for that.
Yep, and thank you, Director Paulson. Next up, I have Director McNabb. Did I miss anyone? Thank you, Director Beckett. Please go ahead, Director McNabb.
So I have kind of 3 tabs that I wanted to sometime talk about. Access to Maplehurst Park, which I see on our picture as a community park. It's actually in Cherry Creek, but the access is from Beaver Creek, and it's a really, really bad access. And the airport, our AVRA airport, I want to talk about expenses with regards to that, particularly wages expenses, and the transit piece that I already brought up with regards to the equalization fund. That's it. I'm easy.
Oh, the reserve, the stabilization reserve?
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, John, can I just ask for some clarification about the AVRA topic?
Okay.
Well, I'm just noticing that there is $100,000 wage and benefit on there, and I'm just more interested in what that breakdown is. I mean,
okay,
it's thanks.
Yeah.
Okay. Any further comments or questions?
You had me, Mr. Chair.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Director Beckett. There we go. I checked you off accidentally in the list. Please go ahead.
Jenny, thank you for your presentation. With respect to the grant application for the submarine water lines, you mentioned that you've applied for a grant. What percentage grant would that be? And is there a timing in which we might hear back on that?
So that was through the ISIP that we made that one grant application for the West Banfield submarine, and because of the size of Banfield, that would provide 100% grant funding for the project. I don't know when we'll hear back. I would hope that it would be by the end of March, I'm hoping, but we can call and find out and see if they have any updates for us.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you. I have Director Roberts next.
Yeah, through the chair to Jenny, and I think to Terry as well. With regards to the West Coast Transit, I'd like to revisit and consider a partial area C commitment to this program, removing a couple of areas. I don't know what the possibility is there, but I'd certainly like to discuss it. And thank you for that.
Okay. Like a couple of stops, is that what you mean, Director Roberts?
No, I mean removal of 2 areas to be levied for this transit program.
Oh, okay. 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 Are there any further comments? Okay. Seeing none, I think we can move on to the next item.
I will be happy that. Carrie, thank you.
Perfect. So although it's not a regional district service, the other item we're going to talk about today is the regional hospital district, as it is the same group of taxpayers and the board is the same group of people. So the West Coast General Hospital debt is in the process of retiring. We're getting very near the end of all of the debt. So as we started last year, a conversation about potentially building a reserve fund for the Tofino General Hospital. But as the next report indicates, there are some other options that the board may want to consider. So I would suggest at this time that we just don't really dive into that until we get into that next RFD from Douglas, but just wanted to bring that up here. In terms of initiatives from Island Health, they are proceeding with the West Coast General Hospital emergency room renovation, and they are also requesting some additional funds this year for our annual equipment contribution. So we'll discuss those at the March 10th Regional Hospital District meeting. And I think that would be all I would want to touch on the hospital district. And if we'll just go to the next slide, I think all the questions I'm going to guess are going to be related to the mitigation piece. So I think we'll just hold those for now, if that's all right. So just wondering if there's any other items for or services that you would like to discuss, I can quickly go over what we have in the parking lot. So we have the rate stabilization reserves for custom transit and electoral area administration. West Coast Transit, a discussion around the potential removing of some areas of Area C. Sprout Lake Marine Patrol, level of service. Agricultural development, I phrased it as possible volunteer honorariums. Regional parks, Mosaic Forest Management, just a discussion regarding the public asset access in progress. Access to Maplehurst Park, and then more details on the wage allocation for the Alberni Valley Regional Airport. If there's anything I missed or anything else that you guys would like to put in the parking lot, that would be great. And Janice, if you want, you could probably stop sharing the presentation so that we can see everybody again.
Great, thank you, Janice. I have Director McNabb and Director Paulson, and then I have something.
So I just have a, I don't know if there's a parking lot question or just a question that could be answered. On page 228 of the report, that it's the graph that shows the revenue for Alberni Clayoquot Hospital District and Tofino General Hospital Reserve. Are these two different contributors, or is it one contributor and it's split out, or how does the reserve of these two actually work?
Yeah. Okay, so in the top section, the revenue and expenditure portion, the second to bottom line says reserve fund contribution. So that's showing basically your contribution down into the reserve fund. And then if you think of the Tofino General Hospital Reserve as a running bank account, you'll see on the second line down, it says contribution from operating fund, which matches that number. And then that reserve would earn interest and grow over time. So the money is coming from the top portion, which is the actual budget. But it is being built into a reserve bank account in the bottom section. And that is the part that we need to decide if we want to build it at that rate or if there's other options that the board would like to consider.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Okay. Any follow-up, Dr. McNabb?
I'm still not really clear with it. It just it appears that there's a separate reserve for the Tofino Hospital and no reserve for the Alberni Clayoquot Hospital District of the local West Coast General Hospital.
When we talked about it, because we know the Tofino General Hospital replacement is upcoming, we talked about it in terms of a Tofino General Hospital Reserve. We could rename it and just be a Hospital District Reserve account, if that would make you more comfortable. But yes, that we are not building a reserve for the West Coast General Hospital replacement at this time.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so that makes sense to me. Okay, Director Paulson, and then I have something. Is there anyone else who has any comments? Thank you. Please go ahead.
This is for Mike. Just going back a bit, and you might want to park this, and it might be just an educational thing for this new kid in the block. It has to do with bylaw enforcement and building inspection. I wonder if we might have just a discussion about where our current services sit at. Are they adequate, or are we underserved? I'm thinking more of properties that create a health and safety concern, both for the property and for neighbors and those sorts of things. And I know they're concentrating on the burning bylaw, building inspections and that sort of thing, but I'm just wondering if we could have a discussion about that line item and maybe where we see that that service today and in the future.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I had a question in regards to, oh, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think that would be best in a parking lot, and we can bring back some more information and have a fulsome discussion.
And whenever we add things to the parking lot, I'm assuming staff will follow up with the person who brought it up if there's any clarifying questions, and email and that sort of thing. Okay, so I had a question in regards to the transit understanding, just in general. I know we are slated to have as a region a discussion about transit and like what we'd like to see in terms of visioning. I am getting communications now personally and just seeing it in the media about interregional transit initiatives and whether and to what degree the province might be involved with that in the near future. So I would like to maybe see or read some information in regards to what steps we might want to take in order to take advantage of any of those monies if and when they become available. I think interregional transit between the ACRD and the RDN is something that may be on the table. I know that there have been connections between CVRD and Strathcona that have existed, as well as the RDN and the other CVRD. And so that there may be an initiative on the island to connect them all in some way, shape, or form. And I just want to be able to take advantage of that if it's necessary. I don't know what it might look like though, so that's something that we need to look into. So I think that's just a request on my part.
Yeah, we can add that to the parking lot, and we'll discuss as a management team a proposed approach for that.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, are there any other comments or questions? Okay, I'd like to thank everyone for their patience and for the staff for their well-organized presentation. I think it's something that has really helped us move along through what's been going on here. And I think this will ultimately save us time when we move into fulsome and substantive discussions. So with that in mind, Wendy, I think this is a question for you or Douglas. Do we need to receive the presentation? And I think that would be the only thing coming out of this.
Yes, please. At this time, all we would need is a motion to receive the presentation. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, Director Beckett and Director Roberts moved and seconded. Are there any comments overall? Director Beckett, please go ahead.
Thank you. I sent a little note to Douglas, and I know that I would echo what everyone else is thinking, but I have to say it on behalf of the board. I was so impressed when you take a look at what has been accomplished, been achieved by our staff with limited resources and during the pandemic. We all should be celebrating, both as a board and as staff, for everything that has been accomplished. So well done, everybody. How about a hand for everybody? Thank you.
Oh, Diane, is that a cast I saw? Oh, okay, so no clapping for Diane. Okay, but definitely thank you for all the work that's been done and will be done. I know that February into March is often crazy, especially for the finance department, but even all the other senior managers and yourself. So thank you. Okay, so I think that moves us into just calling the vote. So all in favor? All opposed? Motion carried. Okay. That brings us into item 5, the discussion of a request for decision in regards to mitigation options for involving the ACRD Hospital District requisition. So this is that discussion that has to do with the correspondence for information that was sent from the chamber. Director McNabb, please go ahead.
Okay, so that's what I was saying, is that we haven't done the correspondence for information.
Well, we did, but since this was kind of a related conversation, we'd be able to kind of talk about both in context. So,
did we receive that? Oh, I'm sorry.
We did, yeah. Here. No, it's fine.
Feeding the cat or something.
Are there any comments? Should we have a bit of a presentation on this, Douglas or Terry?
Mr. Chair, I would be pleased to make a couple of comments just to start the conversation, if I may.
Please go ahead.
So in preparing the report, I noticed that I missed a rather important sort of element or an important point about this conversation. And it's something that Director McNabb has commented on, I think earlier in one of the budget discussions, and it relates to intergenerational equity. And I think Director McNabb was using the example of a fire truck and using debt in the future. And I think that serves as an excellent illustration. And if I could just make a bit of an illustration in that, the very best scenario that we can think of is if we have a fire hall that had only one truck and it lasted 15 years and you replaced it every 15 years, the best scenario would be to, the cheapest scenario, given a few assumptions, would be to save up the cash and pay for the next one by putting the money in the bank and letting that money compound and earn a little bit of interest, etc. One of the tricky parts about that is people in any one year would be paying for a truck that wouldn't be used by them, and they'd be getting the benefit of a truck that somebody else paid for in the past. But on the assumption that you always have to pay for one truck at some point in time, then the cheapest way to do that is by paying cash and letting it compound in a normal environment. What can make it not a normal environment, and we might be in one of those not normal environments, is that the cost escalation of certain things seem to go up faster than inflation, and fire trucks seem to be one of those things. And if you get high inflation generally, well, then it might be better actually to use debt, etc. So trying to balance what we're paying for in any one day, at any one time, in any one financial planning year, versus what services are being consumed at that time is really the tricky part of it, of this, and that's what this conversation is about. So currently, past and present people have not paid. We have not paid our fair share. And that is sort of represented in the liability that's in the ground and pipes and in the buildings we work in, et cetera. We haven't really recognized the full cost, and we're trying to catch up with that with our asset management plans. So that's, again, part of what this discussion is for. What is in the financial plan for the hospital district is, in 2021, is putting away a little north of $750,000 for a future expenditure, and a little north of, in 2022, of 1.2 million for a future expenditure. So deferring the discussion has some advantages in that this conversation can happen during this year, and the board will have those resources in the bank to do what it wants, in its view, to best benefit the taxpayers. And it takes the sort of the pressure away. But one very important element of this is, in no way does this conversation affect what we have heard from the board as its commitment to funding its 40% share of the replacement of the Tofino General Hospital. Everybody, to a person that I've talked to on the board about this, is in favor of this, and we as staff, as a result, every time we talk to Island Health, talk about how do we get this up the priority list. And one thing that they haven't said is that, well, if you have a little bit of money in the bank, it will be better. We've put this question directly to them for that purpose. And what they're saying is, unless you're going to pay 100% of the cost, let me put it a different way. As long as we're in the cost sharing environment that the Hospital District Act contemplates, so our share is 40%, Island Health is 60%, there's no advancing this except on the merits of the building itself in this case, and when it needs replacing. So how the board chooses to finance the replacement of the Tofino General Hospital is a very different conversation, and I would argue unrelated conversation to whether or not it believes it needs to be done. Because as to whether or not the board believe it needs to be done, everything that we have heard as staff is that we are all in, that this project needs to be done, and sooner is better. And we'll draw a parallel for the West Coast General Hospital emergency revamping. The board has had the money in the bank for several years, 6 years, something like that. And that hasn't changed when it actually got done. It was a question of the scale of it, of the scope of it, and a number of delays that were outside of the board's control. But the board had the cash sitting in the bank for a long, long time. So again, slowing this conversation down a little bit allows the board and the interested people who wrote this important letter to have the conversation and make sure that that the group understands that the interest is not waning by virtue of having this cash flow conversation. So I just wanted to add that, Mr. Chair, and I'll be happy to provide any answers to any questions. And we do have a recommendation that the committee of the whole recommends to the board to defer this conversation until a little bit more is known about the asset management plans, until we have a little bit further conversation for the West Coast. But the board can certainly change that plan throughout and up to the adoption of the hospital district financial plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. I do note that the recommended motion does kind of commit us to having that conversation with the details as it's stated. So I think that's pretty straightforward. Does anyone have any comments or questions? Thank you, Director McNabb. Anyone else? All right, I'm going to mute myself now. Thank you.
So the amount that this projected expense is, do we have any idea what that is? I mean, in 2025, we'll have $6 million sitting in that account. So, I mean, I don't know how quickly the hospital will turn this around, whether it'll take the 6 years that they went from saying yes to actually doing it at West Coast General Hospital. But is there a calculated 40% amount?
I'd ask Terry to let us know if she's heard a number, but I have not heard a number that I can recall.
No, I haven't heard even an order of magnitude number at all.
Okay, so not even ballpark. Okay. Yeah.
So
okay.
I would move the recommended motion. Thanks.
Thank you, Director McNabb. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Director Beckett. Quick on the draw. And then Director McNabb, follow up, please.
So I would just like to reiterate Mr. Holmes's statement as far as Beaver Creek and everybody I've heard speaking of this, that we're firmly behind the Tofino General Hospital replacement, and that we will provide the funds, whether they're cash funds or borrowed funds, at the time that's required. And I don't know if, as I say, I haven't heard anybody else say anything else. And if Tofino West Coast area needs to have confirmation, I'm here. We're in.
I think everyone on the board can echo that sentiment. I think this is something that we are committed to. With that in mind, are there any further comments? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor? All opposed? Motion carried. Great, thank you very much. And I think the last thing here is there no late business. Are there any comments or questions from the public, either on YouTube or via the responses at acrd.bc.ca, which I forgot to mention at the beginning, so I apologize.
Mr. Chair, we've received no questions or comments respecting the meeting today.
Okay, and I didn't see anything on YouTube. I was the second viewer, so I'm assuming maybe Mr. Wiwichar was watching us, but we'll see. Okay, so I think that leaves us to the adjournment. Would anyone like to move to adjourn? Thank you, Director Shannon, seconded by Director Cole. All right.
A comment?
Oh, please go ahead.
Who's that cutie?
This is, I refer to her as Wolf Girl online, but her name is Raina. She was born really hairy. Say hi, Raina. Hi, Raina. Hi. So she's having a bit of a tough time. She's getting into those kind of terrible twos, and she's almost 3. So we'll see how that goes. But she is very much in only daddy mode. And as long as I have my phone, I guess she's reasonably quiet. But thank you for asking. She's actually pretty awesome. All right. With that in mind, all those in favor of adjournment? All opposed? All right. Motion carried. And thank you all. Have a good day. And we'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.